Hi, this is Sunil Bharti, and we are here at VMWorld in San Francisco. And today we have with us Dirk Hohndel. I will not tell who you are. We talk about who you are every time. So let's cut everything else and just go directly to the topic. And the topic is that here you are once again announced, not here, you have announced already that you have signed to acquire Pivotal now. And I think in the last 6 months or a year, you have acquired a lot of companies or intention to a lot of companies, and most of those companies are open source. So first thing I'm curious about is what happens to open source at those companies when they become part of VMware family?
So typically when you acquire a company or when you sign a definitive agreement to acquire a company, one of the reasons you do that is for the smart people who are there, for the technologies that the companies bring, and of course for the products and services. But in every case, if you look at open source is about smart people, about smart technologies, about communities that have evolved around those. So when you acquire a company, you always want to try to sustain that, because that is a huge part of the value that you get. If you look back about, 9 months ago when we acquired Heptio, the key reason to bring Heptio into the VMware family was to have Joe and Craig and the team of brilliant developers and the projects that they've created and the communities around those projects. So of course you continue to invest, you continue to give them the ability to grow the communities, to grow the project that they've developed. It's not always that every single project aligns with what you want to do. But typically the majority of the projects that are out there, you invest in and you continue to grow.
So these, you're talking about projects, but not just VMware, companies take these projects and then they productize them. Mm-hmm. You know? So can you talk a bit about the difference between an open source project versus product? And do you call it open source product or just product?
So I typically say it's a product based on open source components. And there is a huge difference between those products and the underlying project. And the projects fundamentally live for themselves. They are their own purpose. Their communities define the scope, the features, the releases. They live outside and independent of a company. Versus the product is something that a company creates based on customer requirements, based on their own architecture, based on the family of products that they want to create to solve customer problems. And very often what you see is that projects have the core technologies that are needed to solve those problems, but then a company takes these technologies and gets them to the point where they are, for lack of a better word, enterprise ready. So these are issues like scalability, complex network situations, complex storage situations. A lot of times you will see open source developers working on a technology on their laptop in a relatively simple IT environment. Maybe it's on Travis where they test things in a container. If you take this then into an enterprise environment where you have 6 data centers across 3 continents with hundreds of milliseconds of latency and lots of package loss and whatnot, making the software still work reliably and in a deterministic fashion is part of the work that it takes to get something enterprise ready. On the other hand, in an enterprise IT data center, you have needs that maybe an open source developer doesn't see as much. It's simple things like billing. How do you bill your internal customers for the use of this software? How can you, in a multi-tenant system, define who consumed which resources? How can you do an integration into the monitoring system of choice? So one of the things that VMware has achieved over the last couple of decades with our customers is a strong loyalty to our way of providing management and monitoring of IT resources. So whenever we create products that are built on open source projects, we want to make sure that we integrate them into this look and feel, into this infrastructure that the customers have already built up expertise in running to make sure that they get the most value out of these projects. And so this is this this process of taking something that is a project and turning it into a component of a product.
No, that's excellent. Now help me, kind of articulate in a better way. If I'm not wrong, when you look at open source, just the project, it's kind of day zero, day one. You can take the code, but you have to do a lot of work to make it usable. So when I look at companies like VMware, other companies, what they do is they actually make it usable. You can just take it as a product. You don't have to worry about all those. You have to do a lot of investment in just making it useful. So is it like wrong to say, or is it fair to say that you actually make open source product usable?
I think many projects, many communities would be a little offended by that because they are usable before. I describe it differently. I describe it as a trade-off between OPEX and CAPEX. So operational expenses versus capital expenses. You can absolutely take an upstream project, invest the engineering time and resources to install it, customize it, make it work in your environment, report into your monitoring tools, have a DRI solution, have a backup solution, have all these components work together. And what you need to do, you need to hire a few engineers, you need to train them to have the necessary knowledge, and you need to spend the time to get there. So these are operational expenses. Alternatively, you can buy this as a product or a service from a company like us. And so we spend the money on the engineering resources, and you pay us for a product or a service that then performs in your infrastructure the way you expect it to perform. And that's really this trade-off. So it's not about usability, it's about what do you pay for? Do you pay for the people doing the work, or do you pay for somebody else to do the work?
Yeah, you can either build or buy, but depends on how much investment and where. So it's more like you take those, great technologies and turn them into kind of services or product that people, make it easier for them to use.
Yes, and often it is not just making it easier to use, but make it more scalable, make it deal with more complex environments.
Right.
And at times it's also specific integrations into an infrastructure that maybe has private APIs or is making extensions to your proprietary APIs so that an open source project has a better ability to integrate with what you're doing. And there are a lot of things that in the integration between an existing infrastructure and an open source project, there are a lot of things that can go wrong. And there are a lot of things that simply require a solid understanding of both parts, the open source projects and the existing infrastructure, to come to the best possible outcome.
And what role do you play as a kind of bridge? Because if you look at open source project and somebody using it, now, first of all, you have to have an open source developer who can go to the community and either make a patch or request. So, but I think you become a buffer where your customers can actually, either feature requests or support requests, so you can help them directly. Otherwise, it becomes very tricky to just go through the whole community route.
Yeah, I don't know if I would describe us as a buffer. I don't think we want to stand between our customers and the community. We are very happy when our customers engage directly in the community. It's just for a lot of customer companies, that is something that they don't see as part of their own value creation. That is not what they want to spend their time on. They'd much rather say, here, this is something that I need, this is something that is broken, please fix it for us. And then we engage with the community, we do the fix ourselves, we work around a problem in a project if necessary. And so it's not so much a buffer, it's a bridge, yes.
That would be an appropriate word. Now let's talk about the sustainability of the project that you rely on and sustainability of the product. Because what are the core components that ensure that the project will survive or sustain despite being used?
So it's by being used, but it's also by having people contribute. There is this, and we talked about this quite a while ago, this difference between consuming something and using something and engaging. If all that happens to a project is that it is consumed, so no one engages with you, no one interacts, no one provides patches back, the project over time will atrophy because it's frustrating for the developers. It does not create a healthy community. So sustainability of open source projects is typically measured by looking at how healthy is the community? How many different people are engaged? How many different companies are engaged? How actively are community members responding to issues, to pull requests, to comments, to feature requests? And this is really a measurement of the sustainability of a project. How healthy, how alive is it? And to me, as a chief open source officer at VMware, the ability to get the engineers in my company across the different BUs to see this part of the value proposition, our engagement into these projects, that is really one of the key tasks that I need to be successful in order for us to have a healthy ecosystem which we can use to build our products.
We have talked about this also earlier, but since all the companies that you're bringing into the family, Heptio and all those companies, they already have open source culture there. So did you have to do any work within VMware to make it more open source friendly, or the environment was already... So let's talk about your challenges that you faced or how you tackle them.
Oh, I think there are always many ways to reach your goals, and there are many different approaches that engineers have to how to engage with open source projects and what kind of culture you want to have in your project. And a simple example is you have a project like the Linux kernel, which to this day has an email-based culture, which is one of the very few and certainly the largest project to have an email-based culture where patches are being sent around in email. Versus most every other project today uses something like GitHub or GitLab and has a pull request culture, a very different form of proposing changes, of discussing them. And I wouldn't say one is right and the other is wrong. They're both viable ways to doing so. And so if you bring in engineers from new companies, but even if you look at engineers across different BUs, business units within VMware, different groups have different cultures, different approaches. And I'm the last person to say, I know the one and only correct way to do this. It's much more listening very carefully to what people do, what they think, why do you do this, how do you do this, and then sometimes asking them questions to help them figure out, is that the best approach? Can I do something else? Should I use a different approach? Should I try something new? And it's always it's this very slow movement towards each other. So if I look at the culture that the Heptio engineers brought into VMware, and we now consider them VMware engineers, of course, and certainly those teams had in some areas different approaches than the rest of the company. Yet, 9 months into this, I'd say we have done a wonderful job of bringing the teams together and having a very healthy internal culture that we will now, again, if these transactions happen, extend by bringing in engineers from Pivotal and the other a long list of other companies that we have
You're
acquired.
almost about to name all of them, right?
No.
Yeah, you should be like Mark Ruffalo. He always leaks, all the secrets from the Marvel movies. He always leaks something. So.
No, I try very hard not to leak any unannounced acquisitions. My legal team will be grateful if I manage to not do that.
Right, but you have said that there's a long list, so I know that we are looking forward to a lot of acquisitions. So anything else you would like to touch upon? I think we touched upon the core, the heart of open source at VMware.
I think if you look over the last 3 years that I've been here, you will see a very notable change in the way VMware talks about ourselves in the context of open source. And Pat Gelsinger, our CEO, earlier today said that we are becoming an enterprise open source software company. And that's a remarkable change compared to 3-4 years ago, when a lot of people saw VMware purely as a proprietary software company. So there is a massive shift in the company. There is a massive shift in our footprint in the industry. Pat this morning in the keynote mentioned that we are now the number 3 contributor to Kubernetes. And that is the second busiest open source, most active open source project out there. So our footprint in this industry has changed quite dramatically. And the way we are viewed in the communities has changed. We are much more seen as a positive force and someone whom you want to have in your project and who you want to engage with. And that, to me, as the open source guy, is of course something very positive.
Yeah, I mean, if it is getting mentioned in the keynotes at the same time, if you really are like among the, I think top third or second, whatever it is.
Number three in Kubernetes
This is incredible.
right now.
So okay, I mean, I may know the answer already, but what was the reason behind this change? Of course, you have been a very good catalyst, there, but still.
I think the way modern applications are being built has changed over the last few years. And as I mentioned before, in-house application development is truly the largest area of application development in the industry. And as more and more companies develop the in-house application along a cloud-native model, the importance of that infrastructure, the tooling, and the whole cloud-native ecosystem for our customers has increased. And obviously, when your customers are interested in an area, you as their provider want to make sure you invest there. And so this is the shift that you've seen over the last few years. And the announcement this morning of Project Pacific that described Kubernetes becoming the orchestration engine for our internal workload in our biggest product in vSphere, I think that's a huge sign of how things have changed. So to me, this is a success story.
Yeah, it is perfect. So we can conclude this interview on a very positive note. Anything, if there is anything else you want to talk about, we can always dig into that as well.
No, this is wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.